To introduce students to thinking about race, let's start with a simple classroom proposition. Clichés should be avoided. Criticized as overused, unoriginal statements, clichés are nevertheless appealing because they can summarize an idea neatly. A cliché summary power might lead us to conclude that there is nothing else to say, that some matter has been efficiently reduced to its fundamentals and stated with sufficient brevity. As such, clichés prevent thought, or I should say they arrest additional thinking, since potentially complex reflection appears compressed into a single, accessible thought that acquires public acceptance through repeated use. Ironically, one might suppose that any discussion of the cliché itself is considered a closed question, yielding no new or interesting insight. So clichés persist, but we might still learn something more upon closer reflection. Racial ideology, I argue, is implicated in one of the most familiar yet recognizable clichés: don't judge a book by its cover. The Renaissance recognized this idea in the Salinas, a statuette that appears odd and unattractive on the outside, but when opened is quite beautiful inside. The figure memorably turns up in Plato's Symposium to describe the unsociable but brilliant Socrates. The lesson to be drawn insisted that internal qualities like human intelligence and wisdom were to take precedence over mere surface things. The statement, "Don't judge a book by its cover," encourages us to refrain from engaging in superficial thinking, drawing hasty conclusions, and formulating judgments based on surface appearance. In the context of teaching writing and rhetoric, we might dismiss the sentiment as trite, but its life application tells a very different story. Consider this fact. Racial ideology has aggressively pursued an entirely opposite course, purporting that judging the proverbial book by its cover is just fine. This cliché of race turns its back on the more conventional formula by placing an inordinate value on the human epidermal cover, our skin. And this emphasis on skin and its emergence to prominence represents an important shift in the history of racial ideology that, in the pre-modern era, has relied on religion, geography, and language. Complaints about the injustice and unoriginality of this topsy-turvy, upside-down racial cliché have been set aside, since its maintenance and durability are, in fact, the cultural goal. This cliché of race is alive and well in pre-modern literature. In George Peele's The Battle of Alcazar, first performed in 1589, Muhammad is described as black in his look and bloody in his deeds. And in William Rowley's All's Lost by Lust, 1619, Muhammad is condemned as a base African, whose insides blacker than his sooty skin. Blackness is presented as instantly recognizable and fully knowable. One need not undertake any additional queries to pose further questions because this central cliché of race compels with its authoritative succinctness. Its legacy is found in sentiments circulated in the 18th century writings of the colonial apologist Emmanuel Kant, who derided a man as, quote, quite black from head to foot, a clear proof that what he said was stupid. But like Shakespeare's Aaron, we are left asking, is black so base a hue? In addition to questioning whether blackness deserves to be so consistently defamed as the full, complete story of a person, Aaron's forceful query asks, in effect, is black so base a hue for you? His immediate audience is the nurse, but the question points tellingly to the often unnamed yet omnipresent fair-faced breeders of our clime, or more plainly, the members of a white dominant culture from whose perspective blackness is constantly being defined. Moreover, in much of our textual analysis of Shakespeare, whiteness remains invisible, hiding in plain sight. From the sonnets to the Merchant of Venice, Hamlet, Othello, and beyond, Shakespeare is, however, quite interested in reflecting on whiteness. Take the example of Viola, the female lead in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. Shipwrecked on an island, thinking she has lost her brother to drowning, Viola turns to the ship's captain, who appears to be the only other survivor of the disaster at sea. Alone in this strange country, she decides to disguise herself as a young man to seek employment. Thanking the captain, whose aid she's about to enlist, she explains why he is an ideal choice to help in her gendered transformation that highlights what she calls her outward form. Not surprisingly, she sees a parallel in the captain, not in his gender but in his external form, his whiteness. Thou hast a mind, Viola says, that suits with this thy fair and outward character. Once again, skin is approved as the apt sign of interiority. She insists on the physicality of white skin, comparing the captain's fair behavior, the visible external expression of his inward state, to a beauteous wall. For Viola, this corporal wall functions as a sign of instant truth. Her surprisingly naive acceptance of whiteness's inherent value sets up a counter-narrative to the way blackness is viewed, even as she commits to the erroneous idea that in matters of race, skin alone is sufficient for evaluating human worth. Probing the cliché of race, therefore, is a necessary moral objective and pedagogic requirement that begins by making race visible in Shakespeare's texts to disrupt the prevalence of a destructive, convenient untruth.